Shining bright lotus.
Thank you for being here, and I think you're going to actually really like this. It's got big fancy words, but let's start with a simple word. What is metacognition? Metacognition is thinking about thinking. So take a moment and just close your eyes for a second and notice what's going on in your body. Like, are you warm or are you cold? Are you comfortable? Is there any pain in your body? So you're paying attention to sensations, right? Okay. Now, how do you know that you're warm or what's going on in your body? Like, what are you doing in your mind to notice that? All right, open your eyes. Thank you. We're not gonna ask for a lot of feedback. I'm just gonna do a series of exercises. Okay. So now, for a second, like, what are you gonna have for lunch today? Think about what you could have for lunch. That could be what's in the refrigerator. I'm gonna go out. I'm thinking, right? All right. We lost Ming for a second, but he'll be back. So you're thinking about lunch. Now, what are you doing in your mind? What is your mind doing to actually think about what are you going to do for lunch? Right? So thinking about thinking. So thinking about thinking is a reflective process. It's when we stop long enough to look at what we're doing and say, like, how did we get here? What did I do? So, it could be even as simple as, looking at a map and saying, this is what we're going to do, and then stopping and saying, interesting, how did that work out? Like, what did I do to figure out how to get here? Right? So it's a reflective process, metacognition. Okay? And it's something that, if you ever watch children, you'll see they don't do a lot of that necessarily. It's a skill that comes online. And it comes online when you move out of the concrete world. So the concrete world is kind of like when you're into objects, right? It's like, think about what's your favorite object? What's your favorite thing? Do you have a thing you really like? It doesn't have to be passionate. It's just like, something that is just like, oh yeah, a ring or an iPod or whatever it is. It's an object. Okay? All right, so when the world is full of objects, right, we don't tend to reflect a whole lot about, thinking about it. But when we start to say, what does that object mean to me? That take that same object, what's it mean? Like, why do I like this object so much? Why is this object so valuable to me? That's now I'm thinking about subtle things, right? Not the object itself. I'm thinking about the relationship that I have with the object. That's like, I want to pick something. I like my bass. Okay? It's like it feels cool to have my bass in my hands and everything. But what I really like about it is what I do with it. Like the experience that I have when I'm playing and people are dancing. And bass players really like it when people are dancing. So it's the experience, the subtle experience. Okay, so that's thinking. But when I start to think about, well, what is it like when I'm actually really in the groove, and there's this thing that goes on where the band's sort of relaxing and the audience is sort of playing and we're just there, and it's like noticing that quality. That's metacognition, when I start to notice that I'm reflecting upon the experience of what's going on, what's really happening. Okay, so that's pretty much thinking about metacognition. Okay, so I won't ask for questions. I hope you're keeping up with me on this one. When we start to move into awareness, pure awareness, clear, deep heart mind, fundamental well-being, Chan, Zen, Dhyana, all these words we have for this experience that moves beyond the thinking mind, right? The narrative self, right? That what happens when we start to reflect about that experience? That's metacognitive awareness. So you start to notice what it's like to have the experience of awakened awareness, of pure awareness. So for most folks who meditate, the first step in the process is to have that experience. Okay? So how do you have that experience? Well, there's a lot of techniques, but the most common technique is to concentrate the mind. Right? So by focusing on an object, that allows the busy narrative self to quiet down, right? And get really quiet, and then we start to notice something else. We start to have awareness of awareness. Right? We start to notice it. Over time, if we practice and we start to become more familiar with that particular experience, right? We get it. It's like, great. I just like playing music, playing basketball, with all the different things. It's like, yeah, that was a good sit. I really got where I want, and I was really calm, and everything was just in the groove in some way or another. Well, how'd you know that? Through metacognition, thinking about awareness, metacognitive awareness. Okay, so it turns out that if we can learn to pay attention to a metacognitive awareness, it improves, it increases, it enhances our whole experience of this Zen cosmology that we're all here to, because we obviously like it. We wouldn't be here on a Saturday morning. Okay, so how do we sort of learn to pay attention to it more carefully, more clearly? How do we think about the thinking of awareness? How do we practice metacognitive awareness? Okay, so, well, in the Rinzai form, we use koans. So let's pick a really easy, simple koan that is we're all familiar with it. The fifth koan. Okay, so just settle yourself for a sec. Eyes open or eyes closed. All right, I don't have a bell, but if I had a bell, it would be just settle our attention. Right, the fifth koan is, what are you like? What are we like at this depth of awareness? Now notice what you're doing. When you hear that instructions, what are you like? What am I like? What are we like? You know something to do. You're doing something, right? It's a familiar koan. We have all these wonderful words: fearless, timeless, boundless, vast. How do you know? Vast. Is there a difference between vast and timeless? Yes and no. That's metacognitive awareness. And recognizing that that's what we're training when we do that koan is, I'm giving you a new language. We're actually learning to think about our experience, but it's a different style of thinking. It's not the same as thinking about what I'm going to have for lunch. It's noticing this awareness. And so when I practice it, I notice it more. But I'm saying notice what you're doing. Let's do another koan that's very, very, very close to this one. It's a similar type of instruction. What must you do in order to recognize and claim this awareness at any time, in any place? Intellectually, remember and choose. But metacognitively, what is remembering and choosing? What are you doing when you're remembering and choosing? And how do you remember and choose all the time? Let's say that one again. How do you remember and choose all the time? And what are you doing when you're just even thinking about that answer? So we're going to have an opportunity to talk about it because we're going to go into small groups. So it's not just going to be listening to the bald guy talk. But I hope you're following what I'm talking about because it kind of is useful, I think. It's useful for me. That's why I'm sharing it with you. So in the Rinzai form, that's what the koans are doing. I mean, sure, the original koan, which everybody uses, is does a dog have Buddha nature? What's the sound of one hand? Is the can you actually have the experience? Junpo's version of that is it possible to listen without an opinion? That's the wake-up koan, you would say. That's in classical Zen. That's Kensho. Can you have the Kensho experience, the awakening experience? At this stage, all of us are beyond that. And so one of the things that Hakuin did is Hakuin talks a lot about, great, you have a wake-up experience, but the real work is post-satori practice. What do you do next? And what do you do next? Kind of, you spend the rest of your life working with it. So in the classical sense, you got koan after koan after koan because the koan asks you to metacognitively develop your ability to see a broader and broader picture of what this is like. Sure, we have this, I can listen without an opinion and it's kind of nice and everything, but it turns out there's a whole world there. As a matter of fact, all worlds are there. Or I should say all worlds are here. So it's a little bit like when you take the blinds off, oh wow, there's light and color, but then you gotta look around. And looking around takes kind of the rest of your life to notice it and to see it. And to see, can you remember and choose when you're really stressed out? Right? That's really a challenge. Can you remember and choose when you're in the middle of a hateful situation? Can you remember and choose? So the classical koans used these stories that were stories of people having awakening experiences from the 9th from the 8th, well, from the 6th to the 11th century, but even beyond. And that kind of worked for a while. And I think Junpo's was sort of saying, that's nice, but we 21st century people can improve upon that. So he came up with his koans. And in a lot of ways, you can, if you go back and look at the koans, you can start to see that he really is asking you to metacognitively become aware of different things. The third koan, who are you, who am I, is not just a not knowing. It's actually the insight of like, well, what's that really actually, what happens to my life when nobody shows up? Can I be aware of that nobody-ness? Can I live with nobody-ness? That requires monitoring in some way. Right? I did the 5th koan. You can do the 7th koan. I mean, there's a lot of metacognitive monitoring in the koans, and that's also true with the emotional koans. Metacognitive monitoring is recognizing that most of the time when you're having an emotional response, there's something going on beneath the emotional response. Can you attend to your emotions somehow enough to notice what's going on, or are you happy you're just being pissed off or ashamed or afraid or whatever it is? That's the easy one, right? Because our limbic systems are good at the easy one, and it takes a certain quality of practice to sort of slow down and say, yeah, I guess there's a lot more going on here than just that obvious one. And so that's the hollow bones lineage practice, is to work with these particular koans and to start to see a broader, endlessly diverse awareness of everything going on. These days, I use a slightly different technique. I use both, and many of you have heard me use what are called pointing out instructions. And the pointing out instructions comes from it's both Mahamudra and Dzogchen tradition. I'm familiar with the Mahamudra tradition because there's something useful about actually. It's a different version of metacognitive awareness to use pointing out instructions for to use koans. So koans are, in a way, they're kind of situational, and they, and what's happening is like you're doing the work, and then the idea is that you go back to the teacher, and then you reflect your experience. And the teacher, in a way, validates the experience. The teacher's aha. So if you read in the classical stories, when people have their awakening, they always want to run off to their teacher to check in to see if their awakening is truly awakened enough for the teacher to say, you got it, in some way or another. And that's still pretty true in the way it's practiced in a lot of ways. Interestingly, when you use pointing out instructions, what's happening is the teacher is the meditation includes the metacognitive monitoring along the way. You're building the muscle. So you hear in my instructions often when I say, notice the quality of the mind, right? So you start to notice yourself, what's going on. You start to notice yourself about how you're getting there, which allows you to, in a way, without this being like too goal-oriented, get there more effectively. Or start to notice when you remember and choose, what are the obscurations that get in the way? What are the common ones, right? What are the, that's if you, my lecture on the 8th koan is all about, what are the obscurations? And I think I did a talk on that. So you can start to practice by learning to pay attention to the landscape as you're going along. And that's the value of pointing out instructions. And the pointing out instructions, for instance, gives you an example of, let's do this again. So let's go back to the 5th koan. So just settle yourself for a second. Eyes open or closed, doesn't really matter. Right? What are you like? What are we like? What are we all like at this level of awareness? So the checking question is, are we timeless here? Another checking question is, are we fearless here? Now notice the difference. Is there a difference between the experience of timelessness and fearlessness? Remember, that's metacognition. You're noticing the difference. And so in a way, we know that it's all, there's no difference. And in some other way, there is kind of a difference. How could timelessness and fearlessness be the same thing? They're different words. They're different, there's something there. Right? There's something there. And so that noticing that quality, so the checking questions in the koan are pointing out instructions, right? To get you, so when you do that koan, we really want you to notice fearless, empty, vast, imperturbable, all those words, because those are qualities that I want to be able to recognize with my awakened awareness. So I'm expanding. Could say you're clearing the mirror if you wanted to go all the way back to that story. But it really is actually training your mind to be more sensitive and more open to this vast and diverse, wonderful universe. What's lovely about Mondo form is we include emotions. It's not just empty, timeless. It's also anger, shame, fear, care, and all those other good things, recognizing them as part of it. Okay, so in our pointing out instructions, all we're doing is saying, rather than doing it in a koan practice, we're doing it as part of our meditation practice. Our meditation practice, rather than being just simply settling into dhyana and kind of blissing out on the awakened awareness of emptiness, we're going to use that time to sort of kind of investigate aspects. There's the knowing aspect of awakened awareness, just that intuitive right here, right now, recognition. And then there's the appearing aspect of awakened awareness, which is to be able to sense the subtle dimensions and qualities. Sure, wouldn't it be nice if the wide open sky was completely empty and didn't have any clouds? But when it has clouds in it, it's still the wide open sky. Not different, but it's not the same. So summarize, and then we get to go into small groups and chat. I'm offering a language, metacognitive awareness. That term, actually, I didn't invent it. It's used quite a bit in Trula Dasa's The Mind Illuminated. He actually uses a fancier term. He calls it metacognitive introspective awareness, saying it's actually noticing what's going on inside, introspective awareness. But I just call it metacognitive awareness. Sometimes I call it metacognitive monitoring. Is a language for the tool of paying attention to how the mind is doing what it's doing in order to be engaged in this practice that we are all engaged in as Zen practitioners. Two methods. One of them is koan work. I actually like Junpo's Mondo Koan work. I think there's value in the traditional koan work. I'm not a classical musician. I'm more of a jazz musician. Today we're going to be playing, Take Me to the River and Earth, Wind and Fire, an Average White Band, not Mozart and Beethoven. So I'm just interested in living musics. And so Junpo is a very living form, and we also have learned a lot of the living form of pointing out instructions, which allows us to actually practice in our meditations attending to different aspects. Okay, the appearing aspects, recognizing that everything is appearing is in awakened awareness. All the clouds are still part of the sky. So can we learn to recognize awakened awareness all the time? And I think that's something that requires us to attend to with a certain style of learning. And I look forward to continuing the conversation with you all. So thank you for listening. I think I'm going to wrap here. Do a little bow. Thank you.
shining bright lotus.